Perfect. So today's webinar is going to be all around B2B sales, looking at how to move from tech capabilities to clear value propositions. And this is coming from a lot of conversations we've been having with customers recently, especially talking about AI, really looking at how do we get to the point that we have clear value propositions. And I think we'll be talking about first principles quite a lot today, Alex. Let's move on. So we've got Alex and myself as your host today. Apologies from Tendai. He'll be joining us hopefully in the next one. We're going to have 4 parts to the webinar. The first is all around creating customer value. Secondly, we'll be looking at multiple stakeholders. Who are your stakeholders, the different customers segments that you might have. And then third, we'll be looking at how do we actually gain insights and what can we do with those. And then we'll leave some time for Q&A at the very end. So a lot to get through in 60 minutes. Hopefully you will enjoy it. A little bit of housekeeping. We've got comments and we've got questions, Q&A, as part of the features in Zoom. As we're talking, if you have comments, please add it there. If you have questions that you want to be considered for the Q&A at the very end, please add them into the Q&A section in the navigation toolbar. They'll be easier for us to keep track of. And also, a lot of you will probably be asking when is the recording and the blog post available? It'll be coming in the next 1 to 2 weeks. You'll get it in your inbox if you've registered for today's event. Also, it'll pop up on LinkedIn and our Strategyzer website. So keep an eye out on that. Perfect. I think I'm going to hand it over to you, Alex, to talk a little bit more about our program library.
Yeah, so one of the things, related to kind of what we're doing is we're expanding beyond innovation, a bit back to the roots of all our tools, which, are used in innovation, but they're used everywhere, also in execution and defining your value proposition. So we created this program library on a multitude of topics, from strategy to team alignment, all the way to what we're talking about today, which is, around B2B value propositions. So if you use the QR code here, you're going to get the general programs. We can just advance maybe to the next, because we're using your screen for the moment, Carol. So what's particular about these programs and what we're super excited about is, there's a bit of learning, but there is a lot of doing. And that's the particularity of our platform. It's not an LMS, it's not a learning management system, it's a doing system, but there are learning aspects. So we kind of combine this learn and do, and then everything you do also, of course, needs to lead to progress. So what we really try to look at is, how are we measuring progress? In particular, if you roll this out to a larger group of people, you want a whole sales team or a whole marketing team to be able to kind of define their value propositions. We're doing this, with different large companies. You want to track if you're actually making progress, and that ultimately will lead to the results. Now, the program library is pretty large, pretty broad, and we're going to zoom into one today. If you just give it one more click, Carol, you can see that we looked at a lot of different topics that our tools can help with, again, beyond innovation. So that's what we're super excited about. Some is in marketing, some is in innovation, like innovation strategy, and a lot around how do you use AI tools to empower teams, to create stronger value propositions. So really getting hands-on across a broad number of topics. And I'm a big fan of back to basics. And one of the back to basics is customer centricity and value proposition. So maybe just the last one on our program library. And the one we're going to dive into today is something that we've seen a lot. And I've seen particularly, the last 3 weeks I was on the road, this ability to define a clear value proposition, in particular in industrial technology companies, ranging from all of those big ones, from Siemens to Honeywell to Schneider Electric. I'm going to use one of those cases today. They're not always very customer centric and not always very good at articulating value propositions, because it is also a pretty complex theme in B2B to kind of articulate how are the different components that you have in your company really creating value. So that's the topic today. You can go on the QR code. This is a specific QR code where you can pre-purchase this particular program. And what we're going to show you today is a little bit like a prototype, pieces of what the program is going to be about. So with that, I think we will quickly go to a Menti poll. So you can throw it over to me, Carol, and people should now be able to see. First, we want to just know who you are. Maybe just, go use the QR code. We're gonna have a couple of other questions afterwards to get you to participate and share a bit so everybody can see from each other. And we just want to know, oh, this is the wrong one, sorry. Go back. We started the wrong place, right? Who is here today is our very first question. And if you can just participate, are you a sales leader? Today is really not as much about innovation, but we do have a couple of innovation people. Of course, in B2B, you want to come up with great new value propositions as an innovator as well. But we're looking at this a bit more broadly, not specifically around innovation, but just defining your value proposition. So if we can, if you missed the QR code, just go to menti.com and then put in the code on top, 65049145, as you can see on the top of the screen, just so we know a little bit who is here. And we also put it in the chat. Okay, so we got quite a lot of other. Be interesting. Maybe you can type into the chat window if other is not representing you here. We would be curious to hear what other actually means. That would be fun. Now, again, we're super excited about using our tools in many different areas. So a couple of the webinars are also going to go in that direction beyond innovation. We're doing what we call an expansion pivot to look at different topics. Okay, so now let's get started actually with the slides. And with that, I'll take over from Carol and then throw it back to Carol. Tendai unfortunately couldn't be here today, so I'm going to take part of what he was going to present. We hope he gets to feel a little bit better. He's under the weather today, working too hard with our clients. Okay, so let's have a look at the first topic, translating technology capabilities into customer value. So sounds kind of basic. How do you explain how you're creating value for customers? What I've seen personally over the last 3 weeks, I've worked with quite a few B2B companies, gave a lot of talks. There is a challenge because we're often very technology focused, and technology kind of creates value in those B2B companies, in particular, industrial technology companies. But if we don't articulate how, it doesn't actually really matter. So what we're going to look at is a very simple case. I took Schneider Electric and their microgrids to illustrate in B2B kind of how you take different components and you create value with them. And the components, around technology, around software, around services, the people we have in a vacuum, they don't actually create value. What creates value is how do they relate to customer jobs, pains, and gains. It's a bit back to basics, but I'm a super fan at the moment of back to basics because there's a huge opportunity there, in particular, since there's so many moving pieces these days. So if we take Schneider Electric and we focus on microgrids, so these are small kind of electric grids, in particular in relationship to renewable energy, that allows customers to manage energy in a more resilient way and to use green energy. When we look at companies in this space, like Schneider Electric, they're very focused around kind of the backstage of the business model, all the different components that they have. So they will talk to you about the software, the switching technology, the battery technology, the architectural experience they have, and of course, the people and the R&D that allowed them to become really, performing in green tech and microgrids. Now, the challenge is, of course, that those microgrid solutions for small and medium-sized businesses are often pretty expensive in terms of capital expenditures. So what you really want to understand is, okay, well, could we create a different value proposition? And here, one of the things we're going to look at now is what they call microgrids as a service. And we'll see in detail how microgrid as a service uses these technology components in partnership with a company called Green Yellow that provides the capital to the customers and does the operations. A solution that takes away some of the big pains from the customers, and then, they earn money from a subscription model. So we're switching from transactional sales of some, technology components towards a solution that is less capital intensive for the customers, of course, more capital intensive for the supplier, because now they have to take over the technology. And that's why they partnered with Green Yellow as a provider of some of the operations in the capital. Now, this is the big picture view. And one of the things that, I was able to do with some of our clients over the last couple of weeks is show the, business model perspective, big picture, beyond the technological capabilities and components. And then from there, help the client zoom into the value proposition canvas. So you kind of navigate between big picture and detailed picture when you think about how do you use your technological components or capabilities in a B2B sales. Now, if we look at the components that we had here, these are the technology components. And in the value proposition canvas, those are kind of the products and services bundled together. But if we take that and we say, well, let's try to understand this customer on the right-hand side, small and medium-sized businesses. Well, let's look at the jobs to be done that they have. Well, it's managing the energy costs, about reducing their carbon footprint. Now there's legal, things that are happening there as well. And at the same time, I probably don't want to use green, because if I use green, you can see through it. I just realized that. It's like a green screen. And then you have here, avoiding downtime. You want a more resilient grid structure. Now, let's dive into the pains. And one thing that I've seen, I'm sure you've seen that as well, Carol, in these industrial tech companies, they're really strong around the technological capabilities, but a bit less, well-versed, in particular the technology team, in the pains and the gains of the customer. Sales team, maybe not, but they don't always kind of collaborate well enough. And when we develop the technological solutions, we don't focus on the jobs, pains, and gains enough. So if you look at the pains, you have very important high capex and complexity is a real pain for these small and medium-sized companies. Of course, the traditional stuff like the outages, etc. But then how do they find a solution that allows them to have something world-class, but without the traditional buying of all the things that we have over here? So if we look at now the gains, what we get to is almost like a little bit of a dream. They would love to have strong business continuity and preparedness. They would love to have advanced technology, stable, clean, and affordable energy. But the problem is here, the gains, what they're looking for, conflicts directly with the gains, because this would require high capital expenditures. So what they had to do at Schneider Electric is ask themselves, how could we find a solution that doesn't rely on us selling these technological capabilities, the old business model, selling the components and some services, but rather asking, could we get rid of the components, internalize that, and in the value proposition, what we actually offer is, still the setting up of the whole system with engineering and procurement, but then we focus on here simple dashboards, alerts and recommendations, and service level agreements. So there is no more need to buy all of the technological components, because you get access to them. It's a little bit like, switching to Amazon Web Services, because now you can plug into the infrastructure and you do not need to buy the servers like we needed to do before Amazon Web Services made, the world's best technology infrastructure accessible to you and me. Same thing here with the microgrid, the access to microgrid solutions with very, very low capex. So if you look at, this new kind of configuration, we can see this perfectly fits with the jobs, pains, and gains of the customers. First and foremost, there's no more technological, financial, or operational risk, because you pay as you go. So that takes away a lot of the pains. There's no more capex, no more need to invest in buying the infrastructure, because you can just plug into it. and the deployment is extremely fast because these are, proven and tested solutions. And on the gain side, now they can get access to sustainable energy solutions operated by a partner. So they don't need to operate this anymore because this is very difficult for small and medium-sized businesses. For larger ones, they might still prefer to kind of have the whole solution on premises. And then, of course, the last one, they can even maybe make some money from this. Now, that is a value proposition here on the left-hand side that almost eliminates or kind of, hides the technological components and capabilities and packages them in a value proposition that really addresses the pains of the small and medium-sized businesses and helps them materialize on the gains. Now, one more thing I'd like to say just in this segment is that if we go back to the business model, one of the challenges that we've detected with some of our clients and some of the prospects that we're talking to is they're extremely good at R&D in their space. And in this case, R&D in clean tech and smart energy. Could be in completely different, spaces like building automation or jet engines or whatever you want, but they're very good at technology. The challenge is that is probably, the most expensive in terms of developing the solution. So it's not the first thing you want to focus on, actually. So one of the terms that we use more and more is this idea that, yeah, of course, you need R&D in these kinds of companies because it looks at the technological feasibility and can we scale the solutions and how much does it cost? However, we want something else in addition. So it's not either or, it's an and. What we want at the same time is what we call business R&D. The ability to get out of the building, to use Steve Blank's words, and focus on testing the desirability. On the one hand, do customers actually have those jobs, pains, and gains that we're looking at? And on the other hand, does our solution, the way we imagine it, actually provide value before we build prototypes? Because prototypes in this space already might cost millions. So we use the business model canvas and the value proposition canvas to test desirability and, of course, also viability from a revenue and pricing perspective. Now, world-class teams, they don't do this in a sequential way. And in particular, they don't start with technology R&D alone, because that's the expensive part. The whole point of coming up with great value propositions is that you test and iterate fast in the cheapest possible way. And Carol will go into that a little bit at the end. What you want is this iteration between the two. So you might go out with some technological solutions. You do business R&D, talking to customers, testing desirability hypothesis. You might actually learn that they don't care about that. You go back with new ideas, and R&D is going to say, well, that would cost us, 10 million and 5 years to do that. So then again, you go back with something that can be done already today, maybe also work in phases. So you iterate between R&D and business R&D constantly to come up and define those great value propositions, like we've seen with microgrid as a service. So that's the whole point of, using your technological capabilities, but then very quickly iterating with business R&D to package them in a way that you come up with a great value proposition. So this is something we're diving into more. A little bit of a prototype of what we're working on is this ability to package technological capabilities into great value propositions and iterating between R&D and business R&D. So that's kind of what we're looking at and what we are extremely excited about. Now, with that, what we're going to do is we're going to go and see how you're doing in this space. And let me kind of try to jump here a bit elegantly without disrupting the screen. Here we go. Now, what we would like to hear from you is your organization more product technology centric? We should probably even put technology centric or customer centric. And we put two options there. One is in the context of innovation, coming up with new value propositions. And the other one is in the context of your current business model, your current business operations.
Alex, I'm just going to remind you, you're standing in front of the customer centric, which I'm assuming people can see, and the QR
Yeah,
code is covering the product
yeah.
centric piece. So product centric on the left, customer centric on the right. Yeah, I think people have got it, but
So this is for the results, right? But the input, again, they can see it, but it's good that we can also understand the results a bit more. So awesome. We have 78 people who are in and 35 people who have already participated. We're kind of landing in the middle a bit. What's interesting is also that innovation and business operations are actually very similar. It's been unexpected. What would you have expected, Carol? Because you came up with these questions. I think it's a pretty awesome
yeah,
way to frame it.
I was thinking with innovation, depending on where it's at, people can be a lot more into the habit of talking to customers more regularly. And with core business, maybe we understand our customers. We've known our customers for 20 years. This is all the same old, same old. We don't need to talk to them. So I thought it would be less with the core business. What about you, Alex? What were you thinking?
It's actually super surprising to me as well, because the whole point of innovation is kind of that you do talk to customers. But now here's the thing. It's also something I understood in the last 3 weeks, in particular, Carol, when we were in Abu Dhabi and I was in Riyadh before. The way we look at innovation is actually not necessarily how others think about innovation. When we say innovation, a lot of people think technology. What
Mm-hmm.
we think is value proposition, business model, and of course, some of the technological capabilities, but we automatically think customer. And what it just reminded me is that we can't assume that anymore. The poll here shows the same thing, that when we say innovation, a lot of people are still very technocentric, which again, technology is great, but you need to navigate between the two, business R&D and kind of technology R&D, like I've said before.
Yeah.
Awesome,
Interesting.
great. That was an interesting insights here that I wouldn't really have expected. So now, apologies that you're gonna have to stick with me. Normally we'd have Tendai now talking about this part, so I'm just gonna babble on, and then you'll have a little bit some insights from Carol at the end. So in the second part, we wanted to dive into another particularity in B2B is that you don't sell to an individual customer, which kind of sounds trivial. Like when we say we sell to enterprise, we don't sell to enterprise. We actually sell to multiple customer segments or segment stakeholders in a enterprise. Now, what sounds trivial is when we get people to map out business model canvas or value proposition canvas, often we see value proposition canvas, customer segment, enterprise. There is no such thing as an enterprise segment per se. When you really go dig in, you actually need to think about different stakeholders. So the example we're going to use is actually a company that we haven't worked with ourselves, but they're really big users of our tools. They kind of, really love everything that we're doing, in particular from the Invincible company. And I think I have an opportunity to meet some of the folks there next time I'm in Paris in 2 weeks. So what we want to look at is how Mishna, with their fleet solution,
in the last 3
has
years,
addressed this.
Mr. Best's haulage
I hope you can
company,
hear.
the Best Company, has grown
Video.
considerably. He now has more than 500 vehicles on the roads all across Europe. It's been a big success, but as his company has grown, everything has become much more complicated for Mr. Best. Especially his tire purchases. He has nightmares about them. And yet, at first glance, tires are not the Best Company's biggest budget item. But tell that to Mr. Best, who has to choose the right tires for each purpose, inspect the thousands of tires in his fleet, check pressure and wear to optimize lifespan, improve safety, and ensure regulatory compliance, while also trying to reduce his fuel spending. Managing supplies, stocks, investments, service provider networks, repairs. It all takes lots of time and resources, and seriously disturbs Mr. Best's peace of mind and the Best Company's profitability.
Okay, so we have Mr. Best here, our CEO of a kind of trucking delivery company, buying Michelin tires. So what we're going to do is we're going to zoom in, right? So you have the CEO, one of the, maybe not himself or herself, but part of their work is buying these tires. Now, of course, buying tires is a very small thing, accompanied by a lot of other concerns that a CEO of a trucking and delivery company actually has, like ensuring compliance, like managing the budget, which goes beyond just buying the tires. Budget is one kind of line item. Now, within that, increasing profitability. And then you have a whole series of pains that are related to that. And generally, you would want to even go kind of beyond the pains specifically to tires to understand, deeply what is a CEO of this type of company struggling with. In this case, compliance fines, fear of making mistakes, falling behind on technology, etc. And then if we're looking at, apologies for the green, I just realized that the green and the green screen don't really mix, so you can see through it. But, minimal number of staff, which immediately has an impact on kind of the budget and the small kind of profitability and thin margins that they have. And of course, 0 accidents. So on the left-hand side, then, if we look at the value propositions and what we've just seen with EVIT tires, what is very cool is that Michelin provides this dedicated team and no cost for replacement and repair of tires. And on the kind of gain creator side, there's really an overall cost reduction and single point of contact, and the whole thing kind of provides that solution for the decision maker. But what we want to understand also that in a context like this, the decision maker is one of the segments. You might actually have a buying committee, or even outside of the buying committee, people who influence the decision, including the users at the end of the day. So here we really like, kind of the framework that Steve Blank and Bob Dorff kind of developed in the Startup Owner's Manual, where you look at these multiple segments. You have the end users who are using the tires. You have the influencers who might actually influence the decision making. This works for every B2B segment. And you have the recommenders who might not even be necessarily formally in the buying committee, but they have a strong influence as experts. And then, of course, you have the economic buyer. Anybody who's in B2B and had to deal with kind of purchasing departments, good luck with that, right? And then the last one, famous saboteurs who you're not quite sure, what's their agenda, sometimes just a political one or even a personal one, or they just don't like you. How do they influence kind of the buying decisions? And for each one of those, you want to have a specific value proposition. So you need to understand their customer profile, their specific jobs, pains, and gains, which are different, each one from the other, and then have a value proposition to the specific kind of segments. So now if we dive into recommenders, maybe you have somebody in the company who's dedicated to buying the tires, ensuring the compliance, and managing the budget. And that is, not necessarily what they need to focus on, but they have maybe slightly different jobs than CEO. And when you look at that, you understand, okay, well, the decision maker we kind of got, bought in, but then there are other people who might influence the decision maker, and we need a completely different value proposition to them. So we need to understand their pains. We need to understand their gains. What are they looking for? So that we can come up with the right value proposition for that specific customer segment. So in this case, recommenders might be a very different one. So extremely important to understand. Now, last one, and I think this is in particular interesting also in software, you have the end users. In our case at Strategyzer, we have users who use our programs on our platform, but they are never the decision makers, or very rarely, if we're talking about large enterprise, our large enterprise customers. So in this case, we have the truck drivers who, have completely different jobs, pains, and gains as the people working more on the admin side of the company. So in their case, it's driving safely, maybe wanting to manage fuel consumption because their bonus depends on that, and of course, complying with traffic laws. And there you have different pains and different kind of objectives and gains. You see, one was consistent, the 0 accidents is one that kind of goes through all of them. So EVIT tires also needs to have a value proposition specifically for the end user. Even if in many cases, they are not directly involved in the decision making. We might have, some software companies that don't have the best kind of user experience, and they're still bought because the end user is not the decision maker. Now, something we believe in, also for our Strategyzer solutions, is that long-term, if you do not have a really strong value proposition for end users, over time, the decision makers and influencers will change their mind, and you won't have this fit. But the key point here to take away is there is no such thing as an enterprise client in B2B, even though I kind of used that in the first kind of section. What we really want to do is zoom into specific customer segments / stakeholders and understand how we can create value for them. Now, here's the important and critical thing also to understand is when we do have this configuration, in particular when we're coming up with new value propositions, you have to ask yourself, which ones do we need to test with first? Because if you go through 5 customer segments and you test with all 5, it's going to be very resource and time intensive. So you need to ask yourself, which one is the most critical customer segment inside the company or the buying committee that you need to test with first? Super, super important. Something that we had to learn as Strategyzer, of course, as well. So with that, I think we are ready also for an next poll. And the last point here that Tendai was going to talk about in this session is also the messaging that you derive from the customer profile and the value map is extremely important. So by understanding the different value propositions to the different stakeholders, you'll also develop a completely different messaging to each one of these customer segments. So you can see kind of all the different pieces that we're looking at for the larger program that we hope to develop based on maybe even your reaction to this webinar that for us is a little bit of an experiment as well. So with that, and before I hand over to Carol, we're going to do one more quick poll to get you to do a little bit of work as well. So let me kind of jump over to our poll, get out of the way, and see if you talk to, at least those of you who are in B2B, if you talk to the different enterprise customer segments, which ones you talk to most. So you have the decision makers who are formally making the decision. You have the economic buyers who are the ones, in the purchasing department who have the money. And just refresh here. Maybe we don't have anybody voting yet. We have the recommenders who can inform the decision making. There we go. We have the end users and we have the saboteurs. And the influencers who have no formal kind of role. Influencers and recommenders are slightly different. Recommenders have maybe a more formal role, and influencers have a more informal role in making the B2B decision happen. Okay, so we do have a focus on decision makers, which is great. But often if we don't understand the purchasing department and how they make decisions, so one of the things that Strategyzer, moving beyond selling hours towards selling outcomes, which, you'd say that's people want outcomes. Unfortunately, purchasing department is not always the check on their checklist. There's no outcome. There's like, how many hours are you spending on this? Mm-hmm. And because we're too efficient in the way we work, we probably, down to the hour more expensive, we just get to the deliverable much faster. So the purchasing department checklist doesn't really favor us because we're unfortunately quite good at what we're doing in that sense. Anything, Carol, that you'd want to add to this conversation here?
It's not surprising, I would say, what I'm seeing. Good to see that people are talking to end users, but also something that we can see is actually lacking quite a lot, and I'll talk about that in my next section. But yeah, are you seeing anything surprising?
Well, one of the things I want to highlight, and not necessarily surprising, but I actually think if I'm thinking of B2B startups, sometimes they're overly focused on the end user, and the end user has absolutely no say in the decision making. So, when you're testing and you're just testing with end users, you might develop a perfect solution, and then the decision makers and the economic buyer won't buy it, and then they're surprised. So, in particular, kind of first-time B2B startups are very naive around product because they want to do something great for the end user, which is, noble. Ultimately, that's what you should do. But they still fail and often go bankrupt because the end user has absolutely no say in the decision making. So again, back to this super important question is, when you want to succeed, business R&D, who ultimately do you need to talk to first to see if the solution will fly? It doesn't mean that we shouldn't talk to the end user, but often it's not the first one we talk to because they have absolutely no decision-making power. So if we can't get the decision maker involved, we can make the best solution for the end user and we'll still fail or lose money if we're in an established company.
Yeah.
Okay,
Great.
with that, I'll throw it over to you, Carol.
I think we have one more question now.
That one's for you, I think, at the end, no?
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Great. So over to me. Let me share my screen. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit more around, okay, we've understood a little bit around the different segments that we have, and we've looked at the value proposition at the beginning, but how do we actually gain some of those insights? So let's look at some of the tools that we have and some of the insights that we've gotten from our customers as to where their problem areas are. I've just got a quote here from Melissa Perry, who's the author of Escaping the Build Trap. A product is a vehicle for delivering value. Features are just the means to an end, not the end itself. And again, I think with Alex saying kind of back to the basics and first principles, we all know this, but I think with things like AI coming, sometimes we're forgetting that, and we're seeing that with our customers. Just a reminder that we still, at the end of the day, need to go back to our customers and ensure that we're creating value for those customers as well as for our organization as well. Okay, so something this struck me as kind of interesting here. It was there's a lot of talk about air traffic control recently, and I don't know if any of you watched John Oliver, but this was taken from his show last week. He was talking about how a lot of air traffic controllers actually use paper flight strips to keep track of where the planes are. So literal physical paper flight strips, right? And so, okay, yes, they're talking about how they need to have more advanced, more money into the technology, but also there's an argument to say that it's actually something that the air traffic controllers need alongside the technology, not just to replace it. So some of the things that they use it for is a legal record. For communication, so that they have it's easier to communicate with other people really quickly. It helps them with their mental processing. It's a backup in case technology goes badly. And also there are some human factors around being able to physically touch something and helping you with your spatial awareness. So really understanding the customer. Alex was talking a lot about, we need to, at the end of the day, ensure that we understand our buyers as well. Some organizations, and actually quite a few that I've been speaking to recently, who've been on a customer insight sprint with me, have actually forgotten about talking to the end user as well, who's actually using it to understand what their needs are. So that's one thing to keep in mind. Another example is coming from some of the organizations that we've been working with around emergency response and the technology that they're putting together for some of these different vehicles and different situations. And sort of like with the last one, there's they've put products out into the market and maybe not getting enough traction. And I can't say who for NDA purposes, but imagine this kind of situation, an emergency responder, right? The teams are maybe talking to the decision makers or influencers or some of the different stakeholders who are saying, yes, let's use technology. Let's have anything that's going to help us to help our patients or whoever it might be in a quicker way, right? And then they have failed to talk to the end user who's really uncertain about whether they can trust the technology in an emergency situation or even trust themselves to understand how to use it reliably so that they can keep safety as a #1 priority for them. So really going back to understanding who your key stakeholders are. One more example for you is, sorry, I just want to go back to this one. Just a key point to say, at the end of the day, we need to ensure that we're going in looking at the value to the customer and to the business, and that's what we need to be doing. So ensuring that we're talking to the right customers. And whether that value is tech or not, we're talking about tech today, but also to remember that sometimes the way that we might be alleviating gains and creating some gains may not involve tech. So just keeping that in mind. One more thing you can just put in the chat if this resonates with you. This is one more example. just thinking about applying for a new job. Maybe you've got your CV together, you're all ready to go, you're gonna go and submit your CV, you're very excited. And then you get to the recruitment website and you can see that you've got to copy and paste whatever you've put together into little tiny chunks. Alex, you probably won't recognize this. You've probably never applied for a job, but a lot of recruitment websites make you copy and paste into their very clever recruitment website that makes it easy for them to see who you are and what you're doing, but isn't very easy for the end user, right? And what they're hoping to see is that it's such a quick and easy thing to do. All you have to do is upload it, and the form is automatically filled in for you. So it works for both you as the person uploading your CV as well for the people who are looking at your CV. I don't know if that resonates with any of you, but I know that a number of my friends have had this experience recently. So just thinking about the value proposition canvas then, back to what Alex was saying, we know that we need to understand the jobs, pains and gains of the different users that we have, and whether they are the decision makers or the end users or somewhere in between. And we also have a tool to really understand how we're going to create that value, which is a value scene, which is an example of what I've just showed you now. And it's a visual way to help understand what that value is that you're going to bring. And it's something that we can use in our interviews and discussions with our stakeholders. So here's another example, a moment of need looking at customer jobs. Today, looking at what are the pains and gains, what happens today when I need to do this particular thing, and then how I hope it's going to be in the future. So the moment of need, we have a marketing expert here named Ben, who's looking at implementing an innovation function. And he's researching all the latest innovation literature. He's read all of Alex's books and various others. He's worried it's going to be hard to build an innovation function. What he's hoping will happen is that he can go to an innovation platform and everything is there for him. It's a turnkey solution. It will help him to confidently coach the teams. So this is an example of what we call a value scene and something that we offer within our programs. And it's something that you can easily do to create some kind of artifact to share with your customer segments in interviews to gather some information in a really quick way. Alex, you have your hand up?
Yeah, so just one example here recently when we ran a kind of big event for, an industrial technology company, rather than getting them to focus on the entire kind of value map and value proposition canvas, we just wanted them to visualize how they create value. And the value scenes are a much simpler tool. And I think that actually forces them to be very explicit. How are we going to create value around our technology? So here you can't showcase the technology because you're forced to actually showcase this, how the solution creates value. And it's easier to use even than the value proposition canvas. So it has proven very powerful to kind of force technology teams to come up with, it's almost like a mini storyboard. And then that's something that they can use in the testing. But even just in getting them to articulate how they're creating value for customers is proven extremely powerful. So Nico, one of our program directors, and I have done this like 3 weeks ago in a big event in Munich. It was very powerful to see how those extremely smart, technology teams who weren't that good at articulating value before were able to embrace this tool and very quickly come up with unbelievably clear and simple value scenes. It's been quite astonishing to see.
Yeah, exactly. So there's two things there. One, just to kind of sum up what Alex was saying, it's this tool can help you and your teams to really articulate your value in a very concise way, because you're forced to be very concise and focus on the key value that you're offering. Also, it is something that you can use very quickly to show your customers something, your different stakeholders, to see if what you believe your value is real for them and if it resonates with them. So it helps you to kind of validate that desirability as well. And just a we've been working with a number of organizations, one at the moment on a customer insight sprint, which is kind of looking at how we can understand who our customers are and go out and gather some first evidence with them. And we offer this as a part of that sprint. So looking at what a value scene is, creating those value scenes, and then also looking at the customer profile interviews as well. And so in the platform that we have a very simple way to actually create some of these value scenes with images and things like that as well. So I just wanted to share that with you. And then when it comes to actually interviewing the customers and gathering some validation around your hypotheses around the jobs, pains, and gains that they have, we also have a customer profile interview widget, which steps you through a very structured process to help you to gather some insights very quickly. One of the pains that we often see with customers is that once they have done a bunch of interviews, they might sit on them for months and months and months because they're not quite sure how to actually analyze them, or perhaps they just don't have the time to do it. So one of the things that we also have here is an easy auto summary that the widget does for you after you've completed your interviews, so that you can quickly see what your key the rankings of the jobs, pains, and gains, which is quite interesting. Once you have drafted your value proposition, tested it with some of your different customers, analyze those insights, and the key thing to do is some action and figuring out how you're actually going to utilize those customer insights into your value proposition and messaging. Alex, you have your hand up again.
Yeah, just one of the things I want to highlight here, because it might, we have a large innovation audience, is this: when we say testing, we don't mean necessarily for something that's new. It's just the messaging, right, that you're messaging, so that you're testing. So if you have that kind of value proposition that you think resonates, is also how you articulate it, how you package it. And while, for consumer oriented companies, like L'Oreal or Nestle, that is kind of what they do, it's their business. It's not always the case in technology and industrial technology. So even just formulating and kind of testing how clear is your message, how easily does it, how does it resonate with the different stakeholders, customer segments, extremely important. So this is way beyond innovation. So we're seeing a lot of this now with product teams, marketing teams in industrial technology companies, how powerful it is. So this is beyond innovation, and it can unlock millions of dollars. So I think this back to basics theme is something I'm excited about. It's kind of hard to sell for us, but it's so powerful, because I think we overcomplexify a lot of things. At the end of the day, it's like, how are you creating value? Can you articulate that? And then, do you have the right pricing? And if customers see that, they'll buy it. Business is simple at the end of the day. For parts of it. Getting there is the hard part, right? The top level is simple. We need to get to that complexity to formulate our simplicity. That's the challenging part.
Absolutely. And I think that's something that we've heard recently quite a lot, which is sort of prompting us to look at this particular program, is that customers have a great product. They believe it's going to work. The tech is great. It's out there in the market, but it's just not gaining traction. So what can they do about that, the value proposition and messaging, to make it resonate with those customers?
And for some of our, the reason we understand this is for some of our newer products, like, the program specifically Beyond Innovation, we're facing the same challenge. We know it creates value. We understand how, but how to package it and then do the lead generation, that's not always the easy part, right?
Yeah, perfect. And then just one example of we haven't worked with Slack, but just looking at, we use Slack on a regular basis, and looking at what their messaging looks like. And you can kind of quickly identify where maybe they've actually looked at customer insights. Maybe these are all hypotheses, we don't know. But you can infer perhaps that this is coming from different customer insights that they have around what customers want to be able to do better, more quickly, and some evidence around how long things take for them. And then just to end, again, you mentioned Steve Blank. He's probably on our mind because you're going to be talking with him on a fireside chat soon, aren't you, in London, Alex, right? At the end of June?
Absolutely.
but just a quote from him. There's a fine line between vision and hallucination, and really, until you go and understand your customers, really, it's just hypotheses that you've got on your in your draft value propositions and business model. So with that, I think Alex, I think we're going to put a poll up again here. Yep.
So two
Any
things. Yeah, one is the poll here. You know, if you're interested in this particular topic that we kind of just prototyped today in the webinar, it's something that we really love to go deeper on, and we're testing with this webinar also, like, what's your interest? So if you are excited about this, get in touch with us, or even pre-purchase. You can see here kind of the link, use the QR code. If you pre-purchase, you will influence the maker decision. We will go much, much deeper than what we've showed you today. This is a little bit of a prototype of the direction that we're taking. So we're testing quite a lot of these programs to see which ones will develop first. This is one I love to work on, but we need to find the evidence first, either from the webinar participants, or, you know, if you have a sales conversation, want to get this for your organization, it'd be something that we'd be excited about working on together with you. With that, I think, Carol, I think I cheated you out of a poll to participate in Menti. So we will go to that one, because I'm curious about what's holding people back before maybe we go to Q&A. So maybe if you unshare, we did have this one here in your organization. What slows teams down in gaining customer insights most? So I do think it's worth sharing. I thought you were going to do it at the end, so apologies for that.
No problem.
What's really interesting is, so we're starting to get people to vote here. Nobody so far, of the few that have voted, we've got 90 in, 15 already voted. Research teams owns customer access is not so much of a challenge, because sometimes we see that somebody, you know, there's only one small group of people that is allowed to talk to customers. Or the sales team is one that we see a lot, right, Carol? That the sales team is blocking because of their annual bonus, and so they don't want to talk about innovation because they want to sell now.
They just want to focus on sales now. They don't want you to disrupt the customer. Exactly. And the one on the end, just because you're covering it, and I'm not.
Yeah, legal team is not, doesn't seem to be an issue.
Ah, interesting.
But bureaucracy is the winner.
Bureaucracy maybe is the winner, and maybe covers all of these things. I don't know.
Yeah.
Super interesting. I know legal team as a blocker, I'm actually really surprised by, because in a lot of organizations that I've actually worked in or worked with, the legal team put the fear of God into everyone around saying the wrong thing to customers, letting out something they're not supposed to, et cetera, et cetera. And so people ended up being too scared to actually talk to the customers themselves. And then go through an agency, or maybe skip it altogether.
So should we see if we can address some of the questions? Maybe we have a couple of minutes, like 2-3 minutes for some of the questions.
Absolutely. So I think one of them we had around, do you suppose this will work the same for services, like a new HR method for
absolutely the same
teams, or a new method or treat burnout? Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely the same. Now I don't know what, like, a new HR method for evaluating teams, or absolutely, right? So it's B2B sales. So there's no difference in that. We focused a bit on technology, you know, heavy firms, because that's one of the things we see. They're naturally inclined towards technology. So that's why we gave it that angle. But it's the same in services, right? So sometimes a bit troubled when people ask, well, this doesn't apply to services. Yeah, why not? You still have buying committees. You still have, it's B2B context. You have a purchasing department. So very, very, very similar.
Yeah, any kind of offer that you have, the methodology still works. You need to understand who you're developing something for, what their jobs, pains, and gains are, and how you're going to create that value. Tendai and I actually worked at Pearson together, where we went into finance, HR, different departments like that, to talk about how they could actually utilize the same kind of process for their own
There was
projects.
one question by Fatih Tuna,
Mhm.
interesting name, around silos. And again, it's related barrier to innovation. We are not looking at this from an innovation lens. The bigger challenge is people just not, or companies not being customer centric, not being able to formulate value propositions around the great kind of technology and software and service components they have. But the element that Fatih kind of emphasizes here is a big one. Is silos. So one of the programs that we would like to launch, but again, we're just going to launch what people buy. So you can influence our maker decision by what you actually buy, or talk to us, with the sales team, is cross-functional teams, or specifically product marketing and sales. Getting them to speak the same language in innovation or not is actually very hard. And one of the things that we've seen, I mean, I've seen it from the beginning of my career, is something that even I believed in, is these visual tools are shared languages. They get everybody to be a lot more aligned around which jobs, pains, and gains are we focusing on? How are we creating value? What's the business model? How are we going to make money? So kind of basic questions you'd say, but the problem is we never make them explicit. So it's not that we're inventing something new by saying, hey, you need to be customer centered. Everybody talks about it. And that's the thing. Steve Blank has an interesting way to say it, but it's been inappropriate, so I'm not going to use that. But it's something that everybody talks about and nobody does. so I'll leave it with that. But this is back to basics. It's and Marshall Goldsmith and Al Mali, two friends of ours, they say common sense but not common practice. So creating a shared language around which jobs, pains, and gains are you addressing, customer profile. How are you creating value map, and business model canvas? That is super, super important. We're still way too technology focused. So common sense, common practice.
Yeah, perfect. Great. Thank you for the question, Fatih. I think you were from Dubai, if I remember correctly. We had another question about, are we using rapid visual to sketch out the scenes? These particular ones we sketched out with our platform itself. But Alex, I don't know if you want to give a shout out.
One is, so Rapid Visual is kind of our AI lab. So Paris Thomas and Matthias Meisberger, who was one of our developers in the past, they're playing around with AI quite a bit. And we use Rapid Visual in the sessions we do quite often. We kind of plug into that. But not all companies want to use AI. So we also use the sketches from Holger Niels Pohl. Like, he has these stick figures and elements. So we use both. We always give people the choice. So we're playing around with both and seeing what gets most traction.
Perfect. One more question. I think we have this question here. From my experience working in B2B, the value proposition canvas is fairly easy to understand. On the other hand, the business model canvas is complex to get across an organization that is not customer centric. Any thoughts on that,
Yeah,
Alex?
so the business model canvas was never supposed to be about customer jobs, pains, and gains, right? So you always use both. It's not either or. They have two completely different purposes. So one industrial technology company we're working with, they want their teams to focus on both the business model canvas to show how are they making, money, the economic value, and the value proposition canvas is how are they creating value for the customer. So you had a slide there, right, that says business model canvas, how do we create value for the organization? So we don't dive into the value proposition, which is never the purpose of the business model canvas. It was just about how are we creating and delivering value. And then there's a zoom in for the value proposition canvas. So the best companies use both extremely well, and they use the right one at the right time. So
yeah, interesting. Great. We have a minute to go. I don't know if you want to answer one more question, Alex, or maybe you want to leave with a final comment.
Yeah, let's just maybe kind of have a final comment there. And I think, I'd love to hear from you also. Me being on the road the last 3 weeks, I just realized that this back to basics is a big thing. Customer centricity, ability to articulate your value proposition. And if we zoom into innovation, understanding that innovation is not technology and science, right? That could be part of it. It's about creating value for your customer and creating value for your business. 2 questions, 2 tools to make it explicit. Again, we're not inventing this, of course, but the language there that gets us back to the basic, making things explicit, is underestimated, this share language, and we've seen it, right? So I'm pretty sure you've seen it with some of the clients you're working with, and this is common sense, but not common practice.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of summing it up. And I think the other piece that I think has come out quite a lot as well is the fact that people are forgetting about all of their different stakeholders and really be understanding where they sit and how they play into their business model. So great. Brilliant. So we've got our final poll up as well. If you could please just share with us how you feel, that would be great about this session. And then check your inbox, our LinkedIn and our website as well. We'll have a blog post and a recording of this in 1 to 2 weeks. Thank you very much for joining. We've got the program here. If you're interested, feel free.
Don't forget to buy, otherwise we can't do free webinars anymore, says the voice from the background here. Thanks, Carol. Thanks, Jerry. Thanks, everybody,
Thanks,
for
Alex.
joining.
Thanks, Jerry. Bye. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.